The first thing I noticed was not the blood. It was the silence, not the ordinary kind either. Not the kind that lives in churches or libraries, or in the little restoration room where I spent my mornings bent over damaged saints, breathing in varnish and dust. This silence was heavier. It had shoulders. I watched. The men in the room were armed and pretending not to be. My brother Carlo's hand was crushed around my elbow hard enough to bruise. He kept dragging me forward across black marble, as though speed could change what kind of place he'd brought me into. My heel slipped once. I caught myself on the edge of a polished table, and a crystal glass trembled under my fingers. At the far end of the room, a man stood near the windows with the city burning gold behind him. He wore black like it had been invented for him, not flashy. No shouting rings, no open shirt, no arrogance on display. His power was worse than that. It was clean, controlled. The kind that made every other man measure himself without being asked. Dante Salvator. I'd heard his name the way ordinary people heard thunder through walls. Distorted, distant. Enough to know when to close the blinds. On the floor beside the table, someone groaned. That was when I saw the blood. It striped the marble in a thin, dark trail from the mouth of a man kneeling with both hands zip-tied behind his back. One eye swollen, lips split, breathing badly. My brother let go of my arm and shoved me ahead of him. "Dante," he said, breathless, oily, already half-broken. "I made a mistake, a stupid one." We both know men like me don't survive stupid mistakes, but I brought something worth more than what I took. I turned so fast I nearly stumbled again. Carlo would not meet my eyes. There are moments when your life does not break all at once. It snaps on one small hinge, quietly, efficiently. I think mine was his next sentence. "My sister." The room didn't move, but something inside it sharpened. Men straightened. Someone near the door laughed once under his breath, then stopped when Dante looked nowhere near him and still somehow silenced him. I stared at Carlo. "What did you do?" His voice stayed on Dante. "She's untouched. She'll stay quiet. She works with the church archives, restorations, old pieces, all of that. You'll find a use for her." A use. I tasted metal in my mouth. "Carlo," he still wouldn't look at me. Dante had not spoken yet. He started toward us, one measured step at a time, and I understood something ugly and immediate. All the stories about men like him got one detail wrong. It wasn't the shouting that made them dangerous. It was how little they needed it. He stopped in front of me. I had expected hard eyes, cruel ones, maybe bored ones. Instead, I got stillness so complete it made my pulse stumble. His face was cut from patience and damage, dark hair brushed back, mouth unreadable. A thin, white scar disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. He looked at me the way men in museums looked at paintings they were not expecting to find in private hands. Then his hand moved to the chain at his throat, a metal, silver, worn smooth from touch. His thumb caught on its edge. He went silent in a way that felt different from the room's silence, personal. As if something had struck him somewhere no one else could see. Carlo mistook it for advantage. Of course he did. "You knew my mother," he rushed out. "People said once, years ago, there was some connection, so I thought." That was as far as he got. Dante hit him with such economy it was almost worse than rage. One fast backhand, the sound sharp as broken glass. Carlo reeled into the table, clutching his mouth. No one moved to help him. Dante's gaze stayed on me. "What is your name?" My throat hurt. "Serafina." He looked like he'd been told a secret he'd spent years trying not to hear. Then he glanced at Carlo on the floor, bleeding onto the marble, and back to me. "Did he tell you where he was bringing you?" "No." "Did you come willingly?" I laughed then. It came out ugly and too thin to be called that. "Does it look that way?" Something flickered in his eyes. Not softness. I wouldn't insult either of us with that word. The man kneeling beside the table made another wrecked sound. I looked over before I could stop myself. He was young, younger than Carlo. Blood at his collar now, not just his lip. I crouched instinctively. 3 guns shifted toward me. "Don't," one of the men snapped. Dante didn't speak, he only watched. The wounded man was choking on it, on his own blood and fear and whatever they'd already done to him. I reached for the white linen folded beside a decanter on the table. Expensive cloth. Monogrammed. Ridiculous, I pressed it to the wound at the side of his neck as best I could. The kneeling man stared at me with terror so raw it looked childlike. "It's pressure," I whispered. "Hold it there." Hard, my hands were shaking. I kept them there anyway. When I rose, Dante's eyes had changed, just a fraction, enough that I felt it. Carlo spat blood on the floor. See. Useful? I turned on him so fast my braids slapped my shoulder. "You sold me." His face twisted. "Shame, maybe, or just pain. I bought you time." "By handing me to a murderer," Dante answered for him. "By handing you to me instead of the men I would have sold him to." The room went colder. Carlo started begging then, for real, words tumbling over each other, the ledger, the debt. The roots he had skimmed, names, half-truths. I stopped listening somewhere in the middle because Dante took off one glove, slowly, and I saw the fresh split across his knuckles, blood gathering there from the strike he'd given my brother. It should not have mattered. It did. The white linen in my hand was already ruined, red sinking through the folds. Before I could think better of it, I stepped into his reach. The nearest guard inhaled like I had lost my mind. Probably I had. Dante's gaze dropped to my hand, then lifted to my face. He did not move away. "This will bleed through your cuff," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, too calm, too small in that room. "If that bothers you." He held my eyes. I tore the clean corner from the handkerchief, folded it once and wrapped it around his knuckles. No one breathed. I felt the heat of his skin, the size of his hand. The total absence of flinch in him. I tied the knot carefully, fingers numb with the knowledge that I was touching a man people died for touching wrong. He looked at the knot, then at me. "Why are you doing that?" It was the wrong question, or maybe the only honest one. I swallowed. "Because it's bleeding." One side of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more dangerous than one. "Saint," he said softly, like a verdict. I let go of his hand first. Carlo was crying now. I hated him for making me watch it. Dante put his glove back on over the linen with no visible pain, then turned to Matteo Basil, the broad-shouldered man at his right. "Take Bellini downstairs." "He lives until I read what he stole." Carlo shouted my name as they dragged him away. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on Dante because he was the only door left in the room that might still open. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Lock the east wing." The understanding hit me a second before the words did. I was not being released. I was being kept. The doors shut behind Carlo. Metal into marble, final enough to feel in my bones. And when Dante turned away, his thumb brushed once more over the cool edge of the St. Michael medal at his throat. The gates closed before sunset. People imagine captivity as chains. Sometimes it is a bedroom bigger than your old apartment, a tray of coffee you did not ask for, and a window that opens only 2 inches no matter how hard you try. I found that out the next morning. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old stone. Pale curtains, a carved wardrobe, a private bath lined in gray marble so cold it hurt my bare feet. Everything expensive enough to be obscene and arranged with the care of somewhere that needed to look civilized, because civilization was otherwise in short supply. The lock clicked from the outside at 7. By 8, I was dressed in yesterday's clothes and standing at the bedroom door, listening. Men's voices downstairs, the low thud of shoes. The clink of dishes, a woman laughing in a kitchen somewhere deeper in the house. Ordinary sounds, which felt almost insulting in a place like this. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Dante. It was a compact, dark-haired woman in her 50s holding a breakfast tray and looking at me with tired, intelligent eyes. "Marta Rossi," she said. "Housekeeper." "If you're going to throw something at me, not the coffee, it's fresh." I stared. She stared back. Then, despite everything, I nearly smiled. "I wasn't going to throw anything." "Good." "Less laundry." She carried the tray to the little sitting table near the window. "Eat while it's hot." "I'm not hungry." That is the first lie women tell in houses controlled by men. She set down a plate of eggs and toast. "The second is, I'm not afraid." Her gaze flicked to my bruised elbow. She had seen it. She simply wasn't making a spectacle of it. I sat because my knees felt less trustworthy than my pride. "How long am I staying here?" I asked. Marta buttered one piece of toast for me as if we had known each other for years, and I had merely overslept. "That depends on what the men decide downstairs. They decide everything. Almost." She slid the toast onto my plate. "The smart women decide the rest quietly." I should have hated that answer. Instead, I filed it away. After she left, another hour passed before a guard appeared to escort me downstairs. He said nothing, just opened doors and waited. The estate seemed to go on forever: polished corridors, old paintings, archways cut from stone, the hush of money that had learned to disguise itself as taste. At the end of the main hall, I smelled espresso and heard a man's voice muttering, "If Marta puts one more basket of bread in front of me, she'll bury me in a medium suit." Another voice, female and unimpressed, answered, "Then die handsome." We stepped into the kitchen. Sunlight fell across copper pots and a long oak table cluttered with fruit, newspapers, and enough pastries to start a religion. Dante's people moved in and out without the stiffness I had expected. Armed, yes. Dangerous, obviously, but alive in irritatingly human ways. The man at the table in a navy suit was broad through the chest and scowling at a bowl of melon as though it had insulted his ancestry. He looked up. "Ah." "The hostage." Marta swatted the back of his head with a dish towel. "Guest," she corrected. He rubbed his skull dramatically. "You hit me in front of company, Marta." This is why I can never love properly. You can't love properly because your cholesterol is a felony. He turned solemn eyes on me and placed a hand over his heart. "Nico Ferrero." Logistics, driving, occasionally risking my life for a man who expects me to do it on black coffee and cucumber. Despite myself, I let out a small sound that might have been a laugh. He pointed triumphantly. "You hear that? She's human. Tell Dante, he likes evidence." Marta rolled her eyes and set a bowl in front of him. "Eat the melon. If I die pale and joyless, bury me with a loaf of bread. Nobody will waste good bread on you." The kitchen door opened. No one announced Dante. No one had to. The room changed temperature. He came in already dressed for the day in charcoal and black, his hair still damp at the temples as if he'd showered fast and cold. Men straightened without seeming to. Nico sat up. Marta did not bother, which told me more about her than it did about him. Dante's gaze found me immediately, not like a man admiring a woman. Like a man checking that a wound had not moved. "Did you sleep?" he asked. A ridiculous question. I answered it anyway. "Some." He looked at the untouched coffee in front of me, then at the bruise on my arm. Something tightened in his jaw. "The lock stays for now," he said. "How generous." Nico sucked in a delighted breath. Marta smirked openly into a saucepan. Dante ignored both of them. "Until I know who else wants you. I don't belong to you." His eyes held mine over the kitchen table, over the plate of pastry, over Nico pretending very poorly not to listen. "No," he said. "You belong to a problem." It would have been easier if he had been cruel in loud, obvious ways. Easier if I could have hated him cleanly. Instead, he took the seat across from me and removed his gloves with a precision that made my stomach tight, for reasons I did not want to name. The white linen I had tied around his hand yesterday was gone. In its place, a neat strip of black medical tape crossed his knuckles. He caught me looking. Heat climbed my throat. "You work with restorations," he said. I nodded cautiously. "Paintings, icons, gilded frames, frescoes sometimes." "For the diocesan archive. Then your hands are steadier than your judgment. You say that because I helped the man on the floor or because I touched yours." Nico made a strangled noise into his. "Melon." Dante's expression did not change. That somehow made it worse. "Because you walked toward blood to stop it." I wanted to say something defiant and sharp. What came out instead was too honest. "Someone had to." The kitchen went still for one beat too long. Marta rescued us by setting another coffee in front of me. "Drink." I drank. Dante slid a folder onto the table. Inside were photographs, route sheets, dock numbers, and Carlo's terrified handwriting. Enough numbers to make my head hurt. He stole from a shipment line tied to Vittorio Orsini, Dante said. The name meant little to me, but it meant something to the others. Nico stopped grumbling. Marta went quiet. And Orsini thinks your brother hid part of what he took somewhere he could not be searched easily. I understood before I wanted to. He thinks Carlo gave it to me. Did he? No. Would you tell me if he had? I set my cup down carefully. You don't get to ask that like we're discussing whether. One of Dante's fingers tapped once against the table. The St. Michael medal flashed briefly at his throat as he shifted. I get to ask because men are already looking for you, he said, and because if Orsini reaches you first, he won't ask twice. I should have been frightened by that. I was. But under it was another feeling, meaner and less useful, humiliation. Carlo had not just sold me, he had sold me badly. I pushed back from the table. Then let me go to the archive, to my apartment. Anywhere not here, I can handle my own life. Your own life, Dante repeated, very quietly. Your brother traded you in front of 12 armed men. He used your body as a bargaining chip. You are not currently in possession of your own life. The truth of it landed so hard I had to grip the chair. I hated that he was the one who said it. I hated more that he was right. He stood. Matteo will show you the chapel and the library. East wing only, 2 guards at a distance. If you need anything, ask Marta. I looked up sharply. You can't order me around because my brother is a coward. I can, he said, because cowardice has consequences. He turned to go. The words left me before I could stop them. And what are the consequences for men like you? He paused at the doorway, not affronted, not angry, just still. Then he looked back at me, and the whole room seemed to take one step backward with him. For now, he said, keeping you alive, Saint. He walked out. The kitchen door swung shut behind him with a soft click that sounded too much like control. The chapel was hidden behind a paneled wall off the west corridor, which felt exactly like the sort of sentence I would once have said with wonder instead of dread. Matteo Basil pushed the door inward with 2 fingers and let me step in first. It was small by church standards, but private wealth had made it richer than some parish sanctuaries I'd worked in. Candles, frescoed ceiling, a carved altar, a Madonna in blue and gold that had once been exquisite and was now split clean through one side of the frame. I stopped. You have a humidity issue, I said before I could help myself. Matteo huffed something almost like amusement. Marta said you'd either scream or start fixing things. I moved closer to the painting. Craquelure spread over the Madonna's cheek like fine aged lines. At the lower corner, the gilding had bubbled away from the wood. Whoever maintained this place had money, guns, and no understanding of climate control. It needs to come off the wall before it warps further. Should I tell the boss the hostage wants scaffolding? I'm not a hostage in here. Matteo leaned one shoulder to the doorframe. Suit jacket open enough for me to see the holster at his ribs. He was older than Dante by maybe 10 years, thick through the middle, with the face of a man who had once been handsome and chosen useful instead. In here, you're someone who knows what she's looking at. That was the first kind thing anyone in this house had said to me without dressing it up as strategy. I touched the damaged wood gently, careful not to worsen the split. Do you warn all the women he keeps? I asked. A beat passed. Only the ones with enough sense to ask the right question. Matteo's voice stayed dry. Stay away from the South Terrace after midnight. If Dante goes quiet, leave the room. If Nico offers you protein bread, he's suffering and wants company. I turned to him despite myself. Does this count as warning me? It counts as affection. Don't make me regret it. By noon, Marta had found me cotton gloves and a proper lamp. By 2, I had a tray of solvents, brushes, and a small stool. Nobody had asked how it happened. The work simply appeared around me, as though the house had decided my hands were more useful occupied than clenched. Maybe they were. Restoration is patient violence. That is what people never understand. You scrape away what should not be there. You dissolve grime. You test what remains. You pray your damage is gentler than the damage time already did. By late afternoon, I had removed enough surface varnish from the Madonna's frame to uncover something odd, a line that should not have been there beneath the gold leaf. Too straight, too deliberate. Not age, not accident, a seam. I bent closer. The smell of resin and old incense filled the little chapel. Outside, somewhere far off, a car door slammed. Men spoke in Italian, then stopped. I became aware of a presence behind me before I heard him. Dante, he did that, arrived like cold air rather than sound. I stayed on the stool because getting up too fast suddenly felt dangerous in a new and much more complicated way. "You've been in here 6 hours," he said. I kept my eyes on the frame. "The Madonna is suffering. People usually mean me when they say that in this house. I can believe both things at once." He came closer. I felt it along my shoulders first, then at the back of my neck. The St. Michael medal clicked softly against something, maybe his watch, maybe the button of his shirt, and that small metallic sound lodged under my ribs. "There is a cavity behind this panel," I said, pointing with the brush. "Someone altered the frame." His silence sharpened. "Show me." I should have moved away. Instead, I shifted only enough to make room beside me on the stool's right, which was absurd because he wasn't going to sit. He leaned over my shoulder. His hand braced lightly on the wall near my head, not touching me, worse than touching me. I could feel the heat of him there, controlled and unmistakable. Clean soap, darker cologne, and something colder beneath both, night air maybe, metal, outside. I used the tip of the blade to lift the loosened seam. A narrow inner compartment opened with a whisper. Inside lay a folded strip of waxed paper and a key no longer than my thumb. Dante took neither immediately. His voice lowered. "Did you know it was there?" "No, you expected me to believe that." I turned too quickly and almost brushed his mouth with my temple. The world stopped. Not really, of course. But enough for my body to make a fool of me. I could feel exactly how near he was, how little space separated his restraint from my panic. "I expected nothing from you," I said, quieter than I intended. His gaze dropped, not to my lips exactly, but somewhere perilously close to that territory. Then he stepped back first, almost. Matteo appeared in the doorway like he'd smelled the danger on the air. "Boss!" Dante took the waxed paper and opened it. A route code, dates, warehouse numbers. 3 of them already crossed out in red. "Someone used the chapel as a dead drop," Matteo said. "Inside a Marian frame," I murmured. "Blasphemy with excellent craftsmanship." To my shock, Matteo barked a laugh. Dante read the page once more, then folded it into his pocket. "No one knew about this compartment." I shook my head. "Not unless they restored the frame before me." His eyes narrowed fractionally, not at me, through me, into some grid of consequences I couldn't see. "Thank you," he said. The words hit harder than they should have. For what? "Doing your housework. For noticing." He left with Matteo 2 steps behind him, and I stayed on the stool longer than necessary because my knees were behaving like strangers. That evening, from the upper landing, I heard voices drifting from Dante's office below. Nico complaining that surveillance vans smelled like stale almonds and regret. Matteo naming routes. Dante speaking so softly I could not make out the words. Then a second voice joined them through the crack of the study door, a man I hadn't seen before, older, polished, almost fatherly. Riccardo Leone. I knew his name later, not then. What I knew in the moment was only this. When Dante handed him the copied route sheet, something in the older man's face tightened and disappeared too fast to trust. A mini revelation, my old professor would have called it, a detail that means nothing until it means everything. I kept walking. Below me, in a room full of armed men, the St. Michael medal clicked once softly against Dante's glass. And somewhere beyond the walls of the estate, someone moved first. Dante stood alone after the others left, and unfolded the small photograph he kept hidden behind the ledger safe. Sofia Bellini's face stared back at him from 20 years ago, young, exhausted, brave enough to hide a bleeding boy and his sister in a church crypt. Serafina had her mother's eyes. And when she wrapped his hand that first night, he had felt the old impossible thing rise in him like a threat. Hope. Rain came in hard after midnight, needling the windows and turning the estate's courtyards to dark glass. I couldn't sleep. Maybe because I had spent the evening thinking about hidden compartments and men who thanked you as if the word cost them something. Maybe because the house had developed rhythms I was starting to recognize. Mateo's heavier step, Marta's slippered efficiency, Nico's theatrical sighs. Dante's silence moving from room to room like weather. Or maybe because once fear stops screaming, it starts listening. I wrapped a cardigan over my nightdress and slipped into the corridor with bare feet because shoes sounded like guilt in this house. The marble held the day's cold. I had only meant to find the kitchen. Warm milk, maybe, water, anything to do with my hands besides let them remember how near Dante had stood in the chapel. But halfway down the servants' stairwell, voices drifted up from the lower landing. Men's voices, one low and steady, one panicked enough to crack. I stopped in the shadow above the turn. Orsini moved 3 cars tonight, Matteo said. West Side, Red Hook, then nothing, vanished. And Leone? Dante asked. The rain thudded harder against the high windows. Even from where I stood, I could hear the difference in his voice when he was working. Flatter, colder, like all the human pieces had been put somewhere safe until the room no longer needed them. He swears the root sheet surprised him. Does he? A pause, then another voice, shaky and young, one I didn't know. I told them what I knew, I swear to God. Bellini said the girl didn't know anything. He said she was just leverage. I never saw her before yesterday. My pulse stumbled. They were talking about me. I should have gone back upstairs. I knew that. Instead, I stepped down one more stair, leaning to see through the carved banister. The young man was on his knees in the foyer below, wrists bound. Rainwater slicked his hair to his forehead. One of Dante's men stood behind him with a hand on his shoulder, not cruelly, just firmly enough to keep him upright. Dante stood in front of the great front doors in shirt sleeves, jacket discarded somewhere, the black medical tape still crossing his knuckles. Matteo lingered to his right. The chandelier light hit the St. Michael medal at Dante's throat and flashed once, cold as a blade. I don't care what Bellini told you, Dante said. I care what Orsini wants. The kneeling man swallowed so hard I saw it from above. He thinks she's a ledger, a key, something hidden. Bellini kept saying the church, the church, the church. My fingers closed on the banister. Dante's eyes changed, not with surprise, with confirmation. A floorboard gave softly under my weight. 3 heads snapped up. For one terrible beat, nobody moved. Then Dante was taking the stairs 2 at a time. I did the stupid thing and backed up fast, cardigan slipping off one shoulder, heels sliding on the polished edge of the step. The world tipped. My hand caught air, then carved wood, then nothing. I felt the drop before it happened. A hard arm hit my waist. The impact drove the breath out of me. My shoulder slammed into the wall. Dante's body pinned mine there just long enough to stop the fall. One hand braced above my head, the other locked around me. The metal at his throat struck my collarbone through the thin cotton of my nightdress, cool, then suddenly warm from skin. For a second I couldn't breathe, not because I was hurt. Because he was everywhere, the rain on his sleeves, soap and dark cologne and the iron edge of outside night, the stillness he carried even in motion. My own hand fisted in the front of his shirt before I realized it. His mouth was near my temple. Stand still. The words were low, not sharp, somehow worse. I tried, my knees disagreed. He felt that too, of course he did. Behind him, Matteo's voice drifted upward, very carefully professional. I'll handle downstairs. Dante didn't answer. He kept his hand at my waist until he was certain I was balanced again. Even then he did not move immediately. His breath touched once near my hairline, controlled, measured. Not one fraction as unsteady as mine. Almost, I became acutely aware of the thinness of my nightdress. The fact that I had come downstairs half-dressed into a house full of armed men. The shape of his hand spanning my side. The humiliating possibility that he could feel my heartbeat trying to escape my body. I was getting water, I said, because silence had become unbearable and I have always talked most when I should not. His gaze dropped to the cardigan hanging off one shoulder. then back to my face. In bare feet, yes, to a locked kitchen. I hadn't mapped the house. One of his eyebrows lifted just slightly. It should not have been devastating, it was. You eavesdrop badly, Saint. Heat rushed through me, anger, embarrassment, the residue of fear, all of it tangled so tightly I couldn't separate one from the other. Your men discuss my possible murder under the stairs. Forgive me for developing an interest in architecture. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved where I could actually see it. Tiny. Brief, I hated how much that undid me. Then he looked past me toward the corridor, and whatever softness that wasn't vanished. His hand slid from my waist, but only to take my wrist and turn it lightly. A red scrape marked my palm where I had caught the banister. He went still. It broke skin. It's a stare, not an assassin. It broke skin, he repeated, like the point was larger than the wound. Before I could protest, he drew me with him down the hall toward a small sitting room lit by one banked lamp and the storm's restless light. He shut the door with his foot and guided me to the chaise near the window. Sit. I should have refused on principle. I sat. He crouched in front of a cabinet, opened it, and took out a first-aid tin so old and polished it must have belonged to the house before him. When he came back, he didn't ask permission. He took my hand in his. The sensation was absurdly intimate. His fingers were warmer than I expected. The grip careful, almost clinical. He poured antiseptic over the scrape. It stung, I hissed. Hold still. You say that as if I enjoy being patched up by criminals in the middle of the night. You nearly fell down a staircase while spying in your nightclothes. Spying implies skill. That earned me another almost smile. It felt like finding contraband. He bandaged my palm with efficient hands. I watched the black tape on his own knuckles pull slightly as he wrapped the gauze. That same hand had struck my brother. Held a gun, caught me before I cracked my skull open on marble. I did not know where to put that. Carlo mentioned the church before, I said quietly. Dante tied off the bandage. Yes, my mother worked in parish records for years. She used to bring home dust in the hems of her skirts. If he hid something there, I wouldn't know where. You didn't recognize the root sheet. No, he lifted his eyes to mine then. And I felt the weight of being believed land between us, with more force than accusation would have. I know, he said. The room held still. Rain moved at the windows, somewhere far off a door shut. But in that sitting room, with his hand still around mine, the world narrowed to something dangerous and too quiet to name. Then why keep asking me? I whispered. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist once by accident. Or not by accident. I didn't know which possibility frightened me more. Because if I stop asking, he said, I start making decisions you won't like. I should have pulled away. Instead, I asked the question that had been growing teeth since yesterday. Did you know my mother? His whole body changed. Not dramatically. Dante Salvator did not do anything dramatically, but the muscles through his shoulders locked. His gaze flicked once to the metal at his throat before returning to me. A long time ago. How? He stood. There it was, the line, the shut gate. I hated it instantly. He put the first aid tin back on the table with too much care. You should sleep. My chest tightened with a frustration, so sudden it felt personal. That's not an answer. No, what is wrong with my face? The question flew out of me raw and unplanned. Because when you first saw me, you looked like someone had opened a grave. He froze. For one beat, I thought I had gone too far. Then, very slowly, he turned back. Lightning flashed beyond the window, silvering the planes of his face, the scar at his collar, the metal. The exhaustion he usually wore too deep for anyone to see. He came one step closer, no more. You look like someone who once saved my life, he said. The room dropped out from under me in a completely different way than the staircase had. Before I could speak, a knock hit the door. Nico's voice came through the wood, harried and aggrieved. Boss, if this is a bad time, please know I came heroically against my will. Marta made chamomile and said if either of you dies from stubbornness, she'll haunt us in an apron. I made a startled sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Dante closed his eyes for half a second, as if summoning patience from a hard place. Come in. Nico entered carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups and the expression of a man unfairly burdened by everyone else's emotional problems. He took in the scene, me on the chaise, Dante standing too close, gauze on my hand, and visibly reworked whatever joke had first arrived. Good, he said. No one is bleeding out. Saves paperwork. He set the tray down and looked at my bandaged palm. I knew it. The staircase finally claimed another victim. I've been telling Matteo the 3rd step from the landing has a grudge. It was the 5th, I said before I could stop myself. Nico pointed at me as if I had vindicated his entire life. You see. Witness, Marta owes me 10 euros. Even Dante's mouth almost softened. Nico, sensing survival, pressed on. Chamomile for the nerves, 1 cup with honey, 1 without. I guessed based on your faces. If I guessed wrong, blame trauma. He lowered his voice conspiratorially toward me. Also, for the record, I do not support kidnapping as a conflict resolution method. I barely support email. Get out, Nico, Dante said. With pleasure. He started for the door, then turned back. Marta says if you skip breakfast again, she'll tell the priest what you did in Lent. Dante stared at him. Nico sighed mournfully. See, this is why Marta will never love me. Too much danger. Not enough bread. He slipped out and closed the door behind him. The quiet that followed felt different, less sharp around the edges. Dante handed me the cup with honey. Our fingers touched, almost. I took the tea, because refusing would have required steadier hands than I had. He stayed standing while I drank, one shoulder angled toward the window, toward the door, toward every possible threat at once. Even at rest, he placed himself between me and the world like it was instinct, not choice. That frightened me more than the gun at Matteo's side. Because I was beginning to understand how easily protection could become its own kind of trap. Go back to bed, Saint, he said at last. It should have sounded cold. It didn't. I rose with the cup still warm in my palms. At the door, I turned. What happened to the man downstairs? Dante's eyes went flat again, all business, all steel. He told me enough. I waited. He held my gaze and said nothing more. There it was, his world in one answer. Efficiency. No apology, no invitation to ask for one. I slept badly after that, with the taste of chamomile on my tongue and the cool ghost of a medal against my skin. In the morning, the kneeling man was gone, and no one mentioned him again. The next 2 days settled into something almost civilized, which was more unnerving than open threat. I spent my mornings in the chapel, working on the Madonna frame, while Matteo hovered in doorways pretending not to watch me solve problems his men couldn't shoot. The concealed compartment behind the gold leaf had turned the whole estate sharper. More guards at the gate, more phone calls. Matteo disappeared at odd hours with that particular stillness men wore when violence had already been scheduled. Dante came and went like weather. Sometimes I felt him before I saw him, the click of the St. Michael medal, the colder air that followed him in from outside. The way rooms aligned around his presence, as if furniture had private loyalties. He didn't crowd me, that was almost worse. At lunch on the 3rd day, Marta found me in the kitchen elbow-deep in almond paste, because I had made the mistake of admitting I used to bake with my mother when archive work got too fine for my eyes. Good, she said, shoving a copper pot toward me. Use your grief for sugar. I looked up. My what? Your grief, your anger. Same muscles in the wrist. She tied an apron around my waist without asking. Nico's sulking because I hid the focaccia. Help me punish him. So I made dessert, not because I was happy. Not because captivity had become domestic enough to blur. I made it because sugar obeyed ratios and caramel obeyed heat, and if you listened carefully enough, a cracked shell would tell you exactly when it was about to fail. Dark chocolate base. Rose cream in the middle. A thin caramel glass on top, burnished until it looked stronger than it was. Nico wandered in halfway through and put a hand over his heart. Is this flirting, or are we all dying? It's dessert, I said. Same thing in this house. Marta slapped his wrist away from the cooling tray. Touch that and I bury you in the herb garden. He sighed at me. You see how she threatens me, and yet I remain devoted. Tell me love isn't an illness. Love may not be, I said. Your appetite definitely is, he gasped. Marta, she's cruel, I like her. When the caramel set, he leaned over the counter and squinted. What do you call it? I hesitated. The answer came from somewhere I hadn't wanted to look. Saint under glass. Marta's eyes flicked to my face. She knew enough not to say anything. Nico, of course, said everything. Too poetic. The boss will hate it. Excellent, serve him too. I shouldn't have let them carry a plate into the dining room, I knew that. But part of me wanted to place something on Dante's table that had been made by my hands instead of taken by his orders. Something controlled. Beautiful. Fragile in a way no one could see until they pressed. At dinner, the men discussed warehouses, unions, and a customs officer whose greed had outrun his usefulness. I sat at the far end by the candles, more ornament than guest, and pretended not to notice the way every conversation lowered when Dante looked up. When Marta set the dessert before him, Nico could not help himself. Serafina made it, he announced. It's called Saint under glass. Which I assume is either romantic or threatening. Dante's gaze lifted to mine over the rim of his water glass. I wish the floor would open. Why that name? He asked. I could have lied. Instead, because something in this house kept dragging honesty out of me like thread from a seam, I said, because it looks hard until you touch it. Silence settled down the table. Matteo hid a smile in his wine. Nico, delighted by danger he did not have to survive personally, leaned back in his chair. I have never been so grateful to witness another man's problems. Dante took the spoon, broke the caramel shell with one clean tap. The sound rang thin and sweet through the room. Then he ate. His face gave away almost nothing, but his eyes held mine one beat too long. Almost. Later that night, I learned why Carlo had chosen me as leverage. Not because I was disposable, though I was. Not because I was quiet, though I had been raised to be. Because before our mother died, she left me a rosary box carved with saints and initials no one in the family could read. Carlo had torn my apartment apart while I was at work and found the false bottom inside it. I discovered this when Matteo placed the box on the chapel table without preamble. My blood went cold. Where did you get that? Your apartment. His expression was unreadable. One of Orsini's men was inside when ours arrived. I grabbed the box so fast the stool scraped stone. The hinge was broken. The velvet lining slashed open. The hidden paper beneath it, the one my mother had once told me never to show Carlo, never to mention to anyone, was gone. I couldn't breathe for a second. Dante stepped into the chapel behind Matteo. He took one look at my face and knew. What was in it? I shook my head once. Reflex, useless. Serafina. I hated that my eyes burned then. Hated more that I couldn't stop it. My mother, I whispered. Before she died, she made me memorize a list of names, just names. She said if anything happened to her, I was to keep the paper hidden and never trust family with it. Dante went very still. What names? Priests, dock workers, 2 city officials, a notary. I thought they were parish donors. I was 16. Matteo muttered a curse under his breath. Dante said, they were root custodians. I looked at him blankly. Your mother wasn't keeping church records, he said. She was keeping ledgers buried inside church records. Names tied to protected shipments, safe houses, payoffs. Whoever has that paper can map half the quiet business in Lower Manhattan. The chapel swayed around me. My mother. Quiet, devout, tired mother with flower on her sleeves and candle wax on her cuffs. I saw her suddenly with new edges. Not innocent, not merely careful, involved, complicit, alive to things she had never let me see. I didn't know, I said. It came out broken, childish, true. I know, Dante's voice lowered, but Orsini won't care. That was the moment the walls of the story I had been telling myself finally cracked. I was not collateral because my brother was desperate. I was leverage because my mother had left something inside me I never understood until men started bleeding for it. The chapel door banged open. Giulia Conti, the estate doctor, strode in still wearing surgical scrubs under her coat. One of the gate men caught a bullet. He says the shooter used the cemetery wall for cover and vanished before the second pass. Matteo was already moving. Dante didn't. He watched me, the paper, Orsini's men in my apartment. Gunfire at the gate, Carlo naming the church, and behind all of it the ugly new shape of my mother. I made a mistake, I said. Dante's eyes narrowed. What mistake? I swallowed hard enough to hurt. Yesterday, in the archive room off the chapel, I saw Riccardo Leone make the sign of the cross with the wrong hand. Matteo stopped. Giulia looked between us. Why does that matter? Because the old parish women in my mother's circle all crossed left-handed when they handled concealed records. My voice came faster now. It was a signal. She told me once it meant the conversation had two meanings. No one spoke. The tiny revelation dropped into the room like a nail into water. Leone. The almost fatherly man from Dante's office. The one whose surprise had tightened too fast to trust. Dante asked only, "Why didn't you say it sooner?" Because I had thought I was imagining patterns. Because I hadn't yet accepted my mother as part of a world that required signals at all. Because some truths rot slower than others. Because I didn't understand it until now. That answer cost me, and he saw that. He turned to Matteo. Quietly, watch Leone, no confrontation. Not yet. Then to me, with the same measured force he used on everything dangerous. From this moment, you don't go anywhere in the house alone. I was so tired of being ordered. So tired of being protected in ways that felt like erasure. No, the word startled even me. Matteo looked at the ceiling like he wanted to be elsewhere. Giulia hid something like interest. Dante's gaze locked on mine. You don't get to refuse this. You don't get to decide every inch of air around me. Orsini already decided he wants you. And you already decided that makes me yours to manage, the last line. Landed too close to a truth neither of us should have touched. For one breath, neither of us moved. Then Dante stepped closer, not enough to intimidate, just enough that I felt the heat of him against the chilled chapel air. His voice dropped so low I felt it more than heard it. If I wanted to manage you, Saint, I would have taken the choice away already. The room blurred at the edges. Almost. He stepped back first. Of course he did. Giulia, he said without looking away from me, check the east wing windows. Matteo, find me in the study when you have eyes on Leone. They left us alone with the Madonna, the hidden compartment, and the wreckage of what I thought I knew about my mother. I sat because my legs no longer seemed designed for standing. Dante remained where he was. After a long time, he asked, "Why did you really make the dessert?" It was such a strange question that I laughed once through the tears threatening me. This is when you ask that? Yes. I looked at the cracked caramel shell still cooling on the side tray, its center hidden until broken. Because, I said quietly, some things look strong until pressure proves otherwise. His gaze moved from the dessert to me and stayed there. When he answered, it was with a truth so small I almost missed it. That isn't weakness. Then he left me in the chapel with my mother's ghosts and a sweetness I could no longer pretend was harmless. By midnight, Dante's men had confirmed Leone met with Orsini's courier outside St. Agnes Cemetery. Betrayal had a face now. We just hadn't proved it yet. War announced itself with shattered glass. It happened 2 nights later, just after dusk, while Marta argued with Nico over whether one bowl of gnocchi could medically count as morale support. I was in the library under a green-shaded lamp, pretending to read one of Dante's history books and failing, because every third line turned into his voice in my head. The first shot took out the window behind the fireplace. The second buried itself in the paneling inches from Matteo's shoulder as he shoved through the doorway. Down, I hit the floor hard, palms skidding over carpet. Glass rained across the room. Someone outside shouted in Sicilian, "Another shot. Another." Then Dante was there. I never saw him enter. 1 second chaos, the next his body over mine. One arm braced above my head as the library windows blew inward in a roar of splintered wood and night air. His weight shielded more than crushed. Deliberate, total, men surged in from the corridor. Gunfire answered gunfire. The whole estate became sound, boots, orders, the ugly percussion of bullets finding expensive things. "Can you move?" Dante asked against my hair. "Yes." "Good. Stay with me." He hauled me up by the back of my cardigan and pushed me behind the overturned reading table as Matteo and two others fired through the broken windows. Smoke bit the air. The library smelled of books, plaster, and gunpowder. I heard Nico somewhere in the hall yelling, "If I die before dessert, I will haunt all of you specifically." Marta screamed his name. Dante turned, firing once toward the terrace doors. A body dropped outside. He didn't watch it fall. That was the thing about him that no story ever captured. Not rage, not pleasure. Just efficiency so complete it bordered on terrifying. Another shot cracked from the upper gallery. "Sniper!" Matteo barked. I looked up and saw movement in the shadows above the shelves, a muzzle flash, then the split-second silhouette of a man adjusting for a better angle. At Dante, I did not think. I grabbed the brass reading lamp and hurled it with both hands. The lamp struck the railing hard enough to spin it. The sniper's next shot went wild, punching harmlessly into the ceiling. Matteo put a bullet through the gallery glass a heartbeat later. Dante's head snapped toward me. That flicker in his face was not fear for himself. It was anger that I had been exposed at all. "Stay down," he said. "There was a man above you. I saw him. You were busy getting murdered." His mouth flattened. Wrong time, wrong tone. Still, Matteo made a sound suspiciously like a laugh as he reloaded. The attack lasted maybe 4 minutes. It felt like a lifetime spoken in gunfire. Then, as suddenly as it began, the night outside went quiet except for the hiss of broken rain gutters and someone groaning on the gravel. Dante gave 2 short orders in Italian. Men spilled into the courtyard to sweep the grounds. Giulia ran in with her trauma bag. Nico appeared at the doorway clutching his left arm and saying, "Before anyone overreacts, I would like it noted that this is barely a wound, and also I was extremely brave." Blood soaked his sleeve. Marta, right behind him, slapped the back of his head and burst into tears in the same motion. "Sit down." "You idiot. It's grazing at best. You say that about all your bad decisions." Giulia hauled him into a chair and cut his jacket open while he complained with operatic dignity about the cost of tailoring. The sound of it, absurd, frightened, human, split the tension enough for me to notice my own hands shaking. Dante saw it too. "Come," he said. I followed him because there was something in his face I had never seen turned toward me before. Not tenderness. Not exactly. Something harder. More dangerous because it included the possibility of losing control. He took me into the little sitting room off the hall, shut the door, checked the windows with one glance. Then he turned back and looked at me, as if confirming I was still physically present. "You threw a lamp at a sniper. He was aiming at you. That is not an explanation I enjoy." My pulse was still everywhere. It was the only heavy thing. He exhaled once through his nose. That same almost smile from the stairwell nearly appeared and died. "Saint," the nickname had changed. I heard it the second he said it. No longer a verdict. Not yet warmth, but something pulled tighter by fear. My throat closed on that realization. "There was blood on your collar," I said stupidly. He touched the side of his neck and came away with someone else's blood. "Not mine." I nodded and then, without warning, everything inside me gave way at once. Not dramatic crying. Worse. Silent tears I had not agreed to, slipping loose while I stood in front of a man who had killed for me not 10 minutes earlier. I turned my face away. His voice dropped. "Look at me." I couldn't. He crossed the space between us, slowly enough that I could have stepped back if I wanted. I didn't. His fingers touched under my chin, lifting gently. His hand was rough, warmer than the room, the black tape still on his knuckles. I hated how safe that touch felt. I hated it because safety should not live in a man like him. Because if it did, then the danger had moved somewhere inside me. Stage 2, though I did not name it then. "I don't know what this makes me," I whispered. His thumbs stilled beneath my jaw. "Alive. I saw you shoot a man through the terrace glass. Yes, and I can't stop thinking about the way you covered me first. Something opened in his face and closed again before I could survive. Looking at it, he let his hand fall. Restraint. Again. He moved past me toward the sideboard, poured water, and handed me the glass instead of the touch I suddenly feared I might ask for. Drink. I drank because my mouth had forgotten how to work. Outside the door, the estate rushed and reorganized around fresh violence. Boots, radios, Giulia's clipped orders. Inside the room, Dante kept himself one impossible step away from me. Why? I asked. He looked at me from across the polished wood and candlelight. Why what? Why am I under your skin? That hit him. I saw it. He said nothing for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he crossed one hand over the St. Michael medal at his throat and held it there, like a man keeping a promise from bleeding out. When you first walked into that room, he said, voice rougher than I'd ever heard it, everybody expected tears, bargaining, fear. You looked at a dying man before you looked at me. The library, the blood, Carlo's shaking hands, it all returned in one brutal sweep. Dante continued, barely above a whisper now. Then you took my hand like it was only a wound and not a weapon. No one in my world does that. They either want something from me or they're afraid of what I can take. His eyes held mine with a force that made breathing feel secondary. You stopped the blood first. The room tilted. There it was, the why named clearly, irrevocable. And because the world is cruel, because hearts are stupid, because adrenaline and grief make liars of all good intentions, I said the most dangerous truth I had. I'm not afraid of you when I should be. His composure cracked by one fraction. Almost. He took one step closer, then stopped himself with visible effort, every line of him pulled tight. You should be afraid of wanting me anyway, he said. The words hit low and deep, and so exactly where I was weakest that I had to set the water down before I dropped it. My answer cost me. Then be careful, I whispered, because I think I already do. His eyes shut once, brief and pained. When he opened them, he was closer, not touching. Close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him in waves. His gaze went to my mouth, stayed there one breath too long. Then, with a control so severe it looked like suffering, he took the St. Michael medal from his throat and pressed the cool silver gently into my palm. If anything happens, he said, show this to any man under my flag and say my name. I curled my fingers around it reflexively. Dante, a pounding knock hit the door. Matteo's voice, urgent and flat. Boss, East Gate, Leon's gone. Everything changed shape. Dante took the medal back only long enough to fasten it around my neck instead. The silver settled cold between my collarbones. His hand lingered once at the clasp, then I left. Keep it hidden, he said. War had arrived. By morning, Matteo had confirmed what my body already knew from the feel of the house. Riccardo Leone had not simply disappeared. He had emptied one safe, burned 2 phones, and taken a root dossier older than my brother's betrayal. His wife had been dead for 3 years. His son lived in Milan and hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. The only thing Riccardo Leone still loved, apparently, was survival. The estate moved like an injured animal all day. Quieter. More vicious. Dante did not leave me alone. That should have comforted me. Instead, it kept showing me the scale of the danger with every room he entered first, every window he checked, every time his men widened their stance when I crossed a hall. Late that afternoon, Giulia found me in the greenhouse with a radio in one hand and pruning shears in the other, staring at a row of basil plants I had no intention of trimming. Nico's arm is fine, she said. I exhaled. I wasn't asking. No, you're worse. You wait for people to offer what you need because you were trained not to claim it. She leaned a shoulder to the glass frame. His arm is fine. Matteo has 3 cracked ribs and refuses to admit it. Marta threatened to sedate both of them with olive oil. I almost smiled. Then Giulia's expression changed. There's a car at the lower drive, she said. No plates. 1 passenger. Before I could ask, shouting broke across the courtyard. We ran. The heat outside slapped my face. Men moved toward the gate with weapons drawn. Matteo was already there despite Giulia's cracked ribs assessment. Nico trailed behind him with his bandaged arm in a sling and the furious dignity of a man excluded from his own gunfight. A black sedan idled beyond the iron gates. Carlo stumbled out of the passenger side alone. For one insane second, I thought he was free. Then I saw the blood on his shirt and the zip tie still hanging from one wrist. He looked toward the house and shouted my name. Dante appeared beside me so suddenly it felt like fate with sharper edges. "No," he said. I hadn't realized I was moving until he caught my elbow. "He's my brother. He's bait." The man in the driver's seat leaned out just enough for us to see the white handkerchief tied around the side mirror. My stomach dropped. The same kind I'd used in the sentencing room. White, clean. A message. The driver lifted a phone to the window, turned the screen outward, and let it ring. Matteo answered on speaker. Vittorio Orsini's voice slid through the courtyard, smooth as polished wood. "Dante, I return damaged property as a courtesy." Carlo made a broken sound at the gate. "You're not known for courtesy," Dante said. "No, but I am known for memory." A pause. "Send the girl and I send the paper. Keep the girl and your traitor brother dies screaming before sundown." "I assume she still values family more than you do." I went cold all the way through. Dante's hand tightened once on my elbow. Not hard. Enough. Matteo killed the speaker. The courtyard seemed to wait. "Open the gate," I said. 3 men answered at once. "No." Dante didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Absolutely not." I turned to him. "He'll kill Carlo. He might anyway. He's still my brother." The truth of that hurt worse than I wanted it to. Dante looked at Carlo beyond the bars. Crying, bloody, weak enough to be useful and alive enough to wound. "He sold you. I know what he did. Do you?" The words snapped harder than either of us expected. Everyone else developed a sudden interest in the sky. I lowered my voice because if I didn't, it would shake. "You don't get to decide whether I can still love someone who failed me." Something dangerous crossed his face. Not anger, recognition. That made it worse. "Dante," Matteo said carefully, "the lower road is clear behind the sedan. Could be a sniper line from the trees, could be nothing. Could be a trap. Was a trap. All of us knew it." Carlo shouted again. "Fi, please." Nobody called me Fi except him and ghosts. I stepped away from Dante's grip. He let me. That was the terrifying part. He let me because somewhere under the control and the blood and the impossible restraint, he had already decided he would rather lose strategically than force me by the throat. I walked to the gate. The iron bars were hot under my palms. Carlo looked ruined, one eye swollen shut, lower lip torn, shame pulsing through him so visibly it made me hate him all over again. "Did you know?" I asked. He stared. "What? About Mama, about the paper, about why they wanted me." His face told me before his voice did. "Not all of it," he said. "I knew she kept names. I thought it was old church money." "I swear to you, Fi, I didn't know Orsini would come after you like this." Rage hit me so clear I felt suddenly calm. "You didn't know," I said. "You sold me to men with guns and expected sophistication." He flinched. Behind me, the estate held its breath. Carlo started crying in earnest then, ugly and childlike and too late. I was drowning. "He said if I brought you in, he'd settle the debt. He said they'd question you and let you go." The driver in the sedan laughed. That laugh decided it. I looked at Carlo, really looked, and saw not a brother I could save back into goodness, but a man who had been willing to gamble my body against his fear. The gate key hung within Matteo's reach. So did the road. And for one terrible, clean moment, leaving was possible. I could have walked through those gates and gone with Carlo. I could have chosen blood over darkness. Chosen the old life, even mangled. Chosen to believe I could still return to an apartment, an archive, a self that existed before Dante Salvator's metal had ever touched my skin. The cost of his world stood all around me, blood on gravel, guards with dead eyes, Marta crying last night over Nico's arm, a sedan waiting like a coffin. This was the real exit point, though I did not name it then. If I walked away now, no one would stop me by dragging me back. Dante wouldn't. That was the terrible, holy truth of him. He would let me choose. I turned from the gate. Carlo made a sound like something breaking. I walked back across the courtyard to Dante and stopped close enough to feel his stunned stillness. "I won't go with him," I said, loud enough for the men and the sedan and maybe God to hear. "I see what your world costs. I see what his cowardice costs. And if I stay, it is because I choose where I stand." Dante's eyes held mine with such force it felt almost physical. The driver cursed and reached under his jacket. Matteo shouted. Gunfire split the air. Dante moved before sound finished becoming meaning. He drove me to the ground behind the stone fountain as bullets chewed sparks off the gate. Men answered from both flanks. The sedan lurched backward. Carlo dropped screaming to his knees. When the shooting stopped, one of Orsini's guards was dead, the sedan was gone, and Carlo had a bullet through his shoulder but was alive. Barely. Giulia took him inside under protest from everyone with sense. Marta, because she had not chosen Carlo's sins but had still been born with a human heart, sent for more towels. I stood in the washroom afterward with blood on my skirt that wasn't mine and watched water go pink, then red, then clear. Dante came in quietly and shut the door. "You could have left," he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. "Yes, why didn't you?" Because somewhere between the sentencing room and the shattered library glass, I had begun to understand the difference between being trapped and being seen. Because he had never lied to me about what he was. Because when danger came, his first instinct was my breathing, not his own advantage. Because I no longer knew who I would be outside this house except hunted. But the truest answer was smaller and more frightening. Because I knew you would let me. He looked like the words hit a place no bullet ever had. His hand came up, not touching me, hovering near my shoulder as if he had forgotten he was allowed to take comfort from proximity too. Then he lowered it, restraint, again. "I'll move Carlo to the clinic house," he said. "Separate guard, separate door, you won't be near him unless you ask." "Thank you." His mouth changed at that. Don't what? Thank me for not forcing your grief." The line landed so cleanly I had to look down. When I did, the St. Michael medal slipped from beneath my blouse and tapped softly against the porcelain sink. His gaze followed it. So did mine. Same gesture, new weight. He stepped back first, giving me room the way some men offered flowers and meant less. That night, from the window of my room, I watched the east gate being repaired under floodlights. I had been given a chance to leave. I had walked back in myself. People think betrayal is loud. Sometimes it is only the absence of the wrong man at breakfast. Leon had still not surfaced by the next evening. Carlo drifted in and out of morphine at the clinic house. Useless except for one ragged confession to Matteo that Orsini kept asking about, the Bellini crypt. My mother had never once taken us to a crypt. Which meant either Carlo was lying again, or we were all using the wrong word for the same place. I knew what it was the moment Marta mentioned St. Agnes in passing while sending Nico to buy basil and low-sodium crackers. Not a crypt, an ossuary room beneath the old parish annex. My mother used to call it the bone cellar when she thought childish language would keep me from asking questions. By then it was too late. I made the worst mistake of my life at 6:30, in soft rain and borrowed courage. I left a note for Marta, Chapel Annex, back by 20 minutes, and slipped out through the greenhouse side gate with Giulia's umbrella and Dante's medal tucked against my skin. I told myself I was helping, that if my mother had hidden anything, I could find it before Orsini did. That one short trip under cover of drizzle would change the balance back in our favor. I was halfway down the alley behind St. Agnes when a van door slid open and a gloved hand clamped over my mouth. They didn't even have to hit me hard, just enough. When I woke, the world smelled of damp stone and candle grease. My wrists were tied in front of me with plastic restraints. The room around me was low-ceilinged and old, lined with niches that had once held bones. Water ticked somewhere in the dark. One bare bulb swung above, making shadows breathe. Vittorio Orsini stood against the far wall in a camel coat, watching me with the kind of disappointment civilized men use when they've decided cruelty is a form of taste. He was handsome in the way certain knives are handsome, Silver at the temples, beautiful manners, nothing honest in him. "Serafina," he said. "You made that embarrassingly easy." I swallowed blood and sat up against the stone pillar I'd been tied to. "You sound offended by efficiency." One of his men laughed. Vittorio didn't. "Your mother had a better instinct for danger." The words sliced deeper than they should have. "What do you want?" I asked. "The paper, obviously, but more than that." He tipped his head. "I want to know why Dante Salvator is burning half the city for you." I said nothing. He crouched in front of me, expensive coat folding neatly around polished shoes. "Did he tell you about Sofia Bellini? About the winter she hid 2 children in the church cellar while men looked for them with guns?" The air left my lungs. So Dante had known my mother. Truly known. Not as a rumor, not by accident. Vittorio smiled without warmth. "There it is." I held his gaze because sometimes silence is the only thing a frightened person owns outright. He studied me for a long moment. "That, I think, is why he keeps you. Not your face, not your blood, the way you refuse to decorate fear for other people." He stood. "It's inconveniently moving." I hated that he understood any part of Dante at all. Mirror, alternate version. The hero's fear in another man's shape. I saw it then even before the full truth surfaced. Vittorio had Dante's control stripped of mercy, Dante's intelligence stripped of restraint, Dante's wounds fermented into appetite. He signaled to one of his men. A wooden box was placed on the floor in front of me. My mother's rosary box. They'd found it after all. Vittorio opened the false bottom and removed a second slip of paper I had never known was there. A child's prayer copied in my mother's hand around a string of coordinates. "I wondered when one of you would think to look twice," he said. "Sophia always hid truth beneath devotion." My chest constricted. The coordinates, the annex, the bone cellar. She had left a trail for someone who understood her codes. I had led Orsini right to it. My mistake. Real, costly, not instantly forgivable. I closed my eyes once, sick with it. "Where is Dante now?" Vittorio asked. I said nothing. He nodded to his men. One stepped forward and backhanded me hard enough to split my lip. Pain flashed white. I tasted salt and iron. Still I said nothing. The next hour became a measured education in endurance, not torture for spectacle. Worse, controlled harm, cold water, questions. One knee pressed too hard into a bruised thigh. The kind of violence designed by a man who preferred elegance to mess. I did not break, not because I was brave in any dramatic sense, because rage held me upright where courage might have failed. Rage at Carlo, at my mother, at myself for leaving the note too late and trusting rain as cover. Rage that Vittorio's voice sometimes echoed Dante's, calm closely enough to reveal how narrow the line between them could be. At some point, they took the metal from my neck. That hurt worst of all. Much later, boots thundered somewhere above us. Shouting, a gunshot. Then, too, Vittorio smiled. Finally, he drew his pistol and stepped behind me, one hand fisting in my hair to pull my head back. The muzzle pressed beneath my jaw. The cellar door burst inward. Dante filled the frame like judgment. Gun in one hand, blood on his sleeve. 3 men behind him, Matteo among them. And on Dante's face, God. Not rage, not first, something colder, the total removal of mercy. For one insane heartbeat, relief almost undid me. Vittorio's voice turned light. "You came yourself." How sentimental. Dante looked only at me. One sweep, bound wrists, split lip, hair in another man's hand. Something in him changed shape permanently. "Let her go," he said. Vittorio laughed softly. "Or," Dante's answer came without volume, "or I become honest." The room held still around that line, mirror against mirror. Vittorio pressed the gun harder under my jaw. "She came looking for her mother's secret. Did you tell her Sophia chose your sister over mine in that cellar? Did you tell her who paid for that choice?" The words struck Dante like visible force. I stared, his sister, Vittorio's sister, the past wound suddenly splitting wider. "Dante," my voice broke on his name. He didn't look away from me. "Later," Vittorio smiled. "There may not be a later." He made one mistake. His hand tightened in my hair, and he looked at Dante for the kill instead of at me for the risk. I drove my heel down on his instep with everything I had and dropped dead weight sideways. The gun fired into stone. Dante shot before the echo died. Vittorio staggered, hit in the shoulder, not dead. Chaos detonated. Matteo took down the man by the wall. Another rushed me and caught my tied wrists in the process of grabbing me. I swung the wooden rosary box into his temple so hard it cracked. He went down with me. Stone hit my knees. Dante reached us in 2 strides and cut the restraints with a knife drawn so fast I barely saw it. His hands were on my face, my shoulders, the back of my head, checking damage with a precision more intimate than any caress. "Can you stand?" "Yes." Lie, I stood anyway. Matteo shouted from the stair. "Vittorio's gone through the north passage." Of course he had an exit. Dante's jaw clenched once. Decision, cost. He looked between the passage and me, and I saw the exact moment he chose what losing would mean. "Matteo, take the tunnel. Don't kill him unless you have to." "I want him alive." Then to me, rough with withheld everything, "You move when I move." I nodded. The rescue was not rescue in the fairytale sense. I was not limp in his arms while men solved the story around me. I walked out on shaking legs. I kept the coordinates page when Matteo missed it in the dirt. I told Dante, as we climbed the stairs under smoke and rain, where the second exit would surface, because my mother used to say old churches always had a breathing place for the dead. Outside, the night was blue-black and full of sirens too distant to matter. Dante wrapped his coat around my shoulders without a word. His hand hovered once at the split in my lip, then fisted instead. Almost. By the time we reached the car, we both knew the final shape of the war. And both of us knew one of us might not survive the end of it. The car ride back to the estate happened mostly in silence. Not empty silence, shocked silence. The kind that comes after fear has burned through your blood and left your nerves glowing under the skin. I sat in the back of Dante's sedan with his coat around me, and the coordinates page damp in my fist. Matteo was in the front seat, barking clipped directions into 2 phones at once while Nico, somehow drafted despite his arm, drove like a man trying to impress death into postponement. No one asked if I was all right. That was a mercy. I wasn't. Halfway over the bridge, Dante reached across the seat and took the torn cuff of his coat from where it had fallen across my lap. His knuckles brushed mine. He did not apologize. He just straightened the fabric and left his hand there 1 second longer than necessary. Almost. At the estate, Giulia met us in the courtyard with a med kit and the expression of a woman deciding whether to kill me herself after she stitched me. She cleaned the cut on my lip in the downstairs study, while Marta cried quietly into a hand towel and pretended she wasn't. Nico hovered in the doorway, pale and earnest. "For the record," he said, "I am too stressed to maintain ketosis and I blame all of you." Marta, from behind the towel, "If you say ketosis one more time, I'll bury you under the basil." He pressed a hand to his chest. "At least then I'd season the soil." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It hurt my lip. It also felt like the first clean breath I'd taken in hours. Nico brightened as if he'd personally restored the oxygen in the room. "You see, she lives. My comedic gifts save lives." "No one respects this enough." "Out," Giulia said, not looking up from the butterfly strip on my mouth. He sighed. "Everywhere I bring excellence, I am punished." When the room finally emptied, only Dante remained. He had taken no treatment for himself yet. Blood had dried black on the cuff of his shirt. A graze marked his jaw. There was dust in his hair from the cellar ceiling, and his expression had gone so tightly controlled it frightened me more than Vittorio's pistol had. Giulia paused at the door, looked from him to me, chose intelligence over curiosity and left us alone. The study smelled of leather, antiseptic, and rain. Dante shut the door. I expected anger. Cold fury, orders sharpened into blades. What I got was worse. He crossed the room slowly, stopped in front of me, and said in a voice stripped nearly clean, "Show me your wrists." I held them out. The plastic restraints had left deep red grooves, one side already purpled. He touched the marks with 2 fingers so carefully it made my throat ache. Then he lowered his head once, not enough to kiss them. enough that his forehead nearly rested against my hands. He was shaking. The revelation struck me so hard I forgot my own pain. Dante, he stepped back instantly as if I had caught him naked. There was a note, he said. You left a note and still managed to disappear in 6 minutes. I know. You knew better. I know. His eyes lifted to mine, dark, exhausted. Full of something he still would not name because naming it might let it own him. You don't leave this house alone again. Something in me stiffened on reflex. You don't get to. I buried a man with my hands at St. Agnes because he laughed while holding your hair. The words cut through everything, not because of the violence. Because of the confession tucked inside it, a pressure valve finally giving way. I stared at him. He went still, aware he'd said too much and unable to take it back. Was it Vittorio? I asked. No, then who? The one who hit you. I should have been horrified. Instead, I thought, with a clarity that frightened me, of course you did. I sat back against the desk edge, suddenly too tired to perform outrage. I made a mistake, I said. Yes, not softened, not denied, just true. Tears stung unexpectedly, less from hurt than from relief. Thank you, his brows drew together. For what? For not pretending I didn't. That landed somewhere deep in him. I saw it. Slow mystery, fast mystery, all of it converging in smaller human ways than gunfire ever could. I opened my fist and showed him the damp coordinates page. I kept this. He took it carefully. Read once, his expression sharpened. The warehouse on 22nd. This is Orsini's breathing place. Backup ledgers, secondary cash, emergency exits. Then we know where he runs if the city turns against him. Yes, I hesitated. What did Vittorio mean about your sister? His sister? Dante moved to the window and stood with one hand braced against the frame, back half turned to me. Classic Dante, watching her and refusing to let himself speak. This was the fourth permitted reason for his point of view, if anyone had been cruel enough to diagram us. When he finally answered, his voice was flat from old damage. There was a winter when Leone sold out my father. My sister Lucia and I were hidden in the St. Agnes cellar by your mother and Vittorio's sister, Elena. 2 girls with candles and no business being brave. His shoulders tightened. The men found us anyway. Only one child could fit through the coal chute Elena uncovered behind the wall. My skin went cold. Lucia pushed Vittorio's sister first, I whispered. Yes, he turned then. The graze on his jaw had begun to bead fresh blood. He ignored it. Elena lived. Lucia did not. Vittorio has spent 20 years calling that a theft. I have spent 20 years calling it my fault because I was supposed to keep her quiet, and I couldn't. The room held a grief so old it had become architecture. I crossed to him before I could think better of it. This was not boldness. It did not feel like that. It felt like inevitability with shaking hands. I touched the graze at his jaw with my fingertips. He closed his eyes, almost. You were a child, I said. So was she. That doesn't make the dead your workmanship. His breath left slowly through his nose. He did not lean into my touch. He did not pull away. Behind my ribs, something broke open and settled differently. Dante, I whispered, and for the first time his name in my mouth sounded like the beginning of something instead of a warning. His hand rose to my waist, stopped there, warm. Trembling once before steadiness returned. Saint, he said, and now the nickname held everything it had carried from the first room to this one. Possession, fear, recognition, reverence he would die before calling reverence. I looked at his mouth. He looked at mine and saw the split in my lip and chose restraint again. That choice undid me more than a kiss would have, so I gave him the only truth I could bear. I'm here, I said, his composure fractured. He bent his head and rested his forehead lightly against mine, careful of my mouth, careful of my bruises. Careful as if I were not fragile but treasured, and he hated himself for knowing the difference. No declaration, no speech, just that, wordless, raw, desperate in its own quiet way. When he stepped back, the loss of contact felt like the room cooling too fast. The 22nd Street warehouse, he said roughly. Tomorrow night. I nodded. Outside the study, the estate moved like a body preparing for one last fight. Inside it, I understood with dreadful clarity what he was becoming for me. Not safety, something harder, home with blood on its hands. The warehouse on 22nd Street smelled like salt, diesel, and old paper. We went in just after midnight under low fog rolling off the river, the kind that turned security lights into halos and made every shadow look occupied. Matteo led the North team. Nico, banned from anything heroic by Giulia and Marta jointly, had been assigned comms in the van and complained over the earpiece the entire time that logistics was a thankless art under fascist management. I wore black borrowed clothes and a bulletproof vest that made me feel both safer and much more aware of all the ways safety could fail. Dante had argued against me coming with a silence so severe it turned the car air thin. I had answered with the coordinates page and the simple fact that I could identify the archive coding system faster than any of his men. He lost that argument because he respected useful truth more than control. It cost him visibly. We moved through the side loading bay without lights. Wet concrete, the metallic tang of river cold. Somewhere overhead, chains clicked against a beam in the draft. Inside the records room, shelves rose in neat steel rows full of boxes marked as textile imports and devotional statuary. Lies with labels. I found the pattern quickly: Marian feast days for bribe ledgers, saints' names for routes, burial dates for emergency cash. My hands shook once, then steadied. There, I whispered, sliding out a gray case marked Santa Lucia. Dante's eyes flicked to the label and away. Old wound, new utility. He opened the case. Money, passports, a hard drive. 2 paper ledgers. Enough to ruin Vittorio with the right audiences and ignite the city with the wrong ones. Copy the drive and burn the originals, Matteo murmured over comms. No, Dante said. We take everything. Of course. Movement snapped from the far aisle. Gunfire erupted before thought. Dante shoved me behind a steel shelf as bullets sparked off beams and tore cardboard into confetti. Men shouted in Italian and Russian both. Orsini had hired Broad for this one. Matteo answered from the north door. Somewhere outside, tires screamed. I crouched low, clutching the hard drive inside my vest while Dante fired in calm, economical bursts beside me. The muzzle flash lit the cut of his jaw, the set of his mouth, the total concentration that had nothing theatrical in it. He did not snarl. He did not curse. Men simply fell where his attention landed. Then Vittorio's voice rolled from the catwalk above us. I always wondered what Sofia Bellini would think of the two of you. Dante looked up, gun tracking. Vittorio stood behind the rail with one arm in a sling from the cellar wound, elegance ruined but not humbled. Beside him, shockingly, stood Carlo. Alive, pale. A pistol in his unsteady hand and panic all over his face. My body went cold. Fie, he called. He said he'd let me go. He said if I brought them here. He was never letting you go, I said. Carlo's mouth trembled. I know that now. Dante did not take his eyes off Vittorio. Get down from there. Vittorio smiled faintly. I think we've exhausted your commands. He nodded once to Carlo. My brother raised the gun. Not at me, at Dante. The moment stretched impossibly thin. I saw Carlo's hand shaking. Saw Dante preparing to move and calculating that he could not get to me and shoot Vittorio and disarm my brother in the same second. Saw, too, the old pattern repeating: siblings in a church cellar, one child pushed first, the other paying. No, I shouted. Carlo fired. Dante turned. The bullet hit Matteo in the side as he came through the east aisle. Everything shattered. Matteo dropped hard against the shelf, blood already dark on black wool. Dante's face emptied to something lethal beyond anger. He shot Carlo through the shoulder before my brother could fire again, then moved me bodily toward cover as Vittorio opened up from above. Stay down, I fought him. Not because I was brave. Because Matteo was bleeding and Carlo was sobbing, and this whole night had become the rotten harvest of every bad choice men had made around me. I crawled to Matteo on my knees through paper and spent shells. Compress here, he ground out, hand over his side. I slapped my palm over the wound. Blood flooded hot between my fingers. "Dante," I shouted. "He's hit bad." Dante was already moving up the steel stairs toward the catwalk, each shot deliberate, driving Vittorio back by inches. A man lunged from the side aisle at me. I grabbed the nearest box and swung. Ceramic devotional figures burst across his face in a spray of plaster saints. He reeled. Matteo, half-conscious and still mean enough to be useful, shot him from the floor. "Good throw," he muttered. "Don't flirt while dying," I snapped, pressing harder. Over comms, Nico's voice cracked in my ear, stripped of comedy for once. "South exit, boss, south exit." Vittorio was running. Dante reached the top platform, vaulted the last 3 steps, and disappeared from sight. 3 shots. Silence, then 2 more. When he came back into view, he had Vittorio by the collar, and the front of his coat was wet with blood that wasn't all his own. He dragged him to the rail and forced him to look down at the room. Carlo crying on the floor, Matteo gritting his teeth against my hand. Ledgers split open like bodies. The whole ugly city, hidden inside neat labels and shelves. Vittorio laughed once, breathless and bloody. "You finally look like me." Dante's jaw flexed. There was the villain mirror in its final shape, not pure evil, reflection. The man Dante could have become if grief had burned away the last reasons to stop. "That's the difference," Dante said quietly. "I still know where to stop." He shot the chain above Vittorio instead of the man himself. A suspended crate dropped, smashing through the catwalk support behind him. Vittorio fell with it into the stacked boxes below. Metal, wood, bone, final enough, not clean, earned. At almost the same second, Carlo reached for his fallen gun. I saw it. So did Dante. Our eyes met across the wrecked warehouse. I shook my head once. Whether for mercy or surrender, I still couldn't tell you. Dante lowered his weapon by a fraction. Carlo broke. He turned the pistol on himself. The shot rang small compared to all the others. After that, the room changed temperature. Not victory, never that, only aftermath. Giulia's team arrived 3 minutes later and took over Matteo's wound with swearing precise enough to qualify as liturgy. He lived. Barely. Nico burst in behind them white-faced and furious, saw Matteo breathing, and sat down on an ammunition crate as if his knees had filed for divorce. Dante stood near the ruined shelves while sirens bled distantly toward us. There was blood on his collar, a tear in his sleeve, and something missing from his face that had been there in Chapter 1. Some sealed piece of ice, gone now, whether he wanted it or not. I went to him through plastered dust and paper scraps. He looked at me like a man reassembling the world from fragments. "It's over," I said. He exhaled once, long and wrecked. Then, because there are moments when no one else can carry the truth for you, he answered, "It is over." War does not end when the shooting stops. It leaks out of walls slowly. Through funerals. Through accountants. Through men deciding which loyalties were purchased and which were earned. Through women like Marta washing blood from linen no one will ever mention again. 6 weeks later, the estate smelled like paint in one corridor and basil in another. Matteo was walking with a cane and insulting anyone who offered to carry things for him. Nico had abandoned ketosis entirely after Giulia informed him that getting shot entitled him to pasta until morale improved. He now ate like a man discovering religion. While still pining visibly for Marta, who responded to his declarations by assigning him increasingly domestic punishments. "Fold these napkins if you love me." "I do." "Then fold quietly." I watched this from the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon while shaping ravioli with Marta's supervision and more concentration than the task deserved. "You pinch too tightly," Marta said. "I thought that was the point." "No, you want them sealed, not strangled. Men you can strangle." Pasta requires finesse. Across from me, Nico placed a hand over his heart. "This is why she'll never choose me. I'm too available." "You're too dramatic," Marta said. He considered that. "I can change." "No, you can't." He sighed with theatrical sorrow and stole one raviolo from the tray. Marta hit him with the wooden spoon. He yelped. I laughed so hard I had to put the dough down. The sound surprised me. Not because I had forgotten how, because I had not expected this house to become a place my body did it without asking. Outside the kitchen, the rebuilt east gate stood under fresh black paint. Carlo was buried in the Bellini plot with a stone I paid for myself and no lies written on it. Vittorio was dead. Leone had turned state's witness through channels Dante would never explain to me, and I had stopped asking. The city's understructure had not become clean. It had merely shifted weight. Warmth that was not naive. That was all anyone got. Dante entered the kitchen carrying a file folder and wearing the expression of a man interrupted on his way to something grim. The expression vanished when he saw the flower on my cheek. Not entirely, just enough. Nico noticed first and announced to the room, "Ah, the boss looks almost human." "This is historic." "Leave," Dante said. "I'm eating. Take it with you." Nico scooped 3 ravioli onto a bread plate. "Marta, if I die, you'll die full." "Go," he saluted me with the plate and vanished, muttering about persecution. Marta followed at a dignified pace that still somehow looked strategic. Then it was just us, and a table dusted in flour. Dante set the file down. "The St. Agnes Annex has been deeded back to the parish under a shell fund with no traceable connection to me." I wiped my hands on the apron. "You did that for the church? I did it because you'd hate looking at it otherwise." There it was, his version of tenderness, always wearing another coat. I smiled before I meant to. "Thank you," he stepped closer. Since the warehouse, touch had become less rare but no less devastating. A hand at my back while guiding me through a crowd, fingers brushing mine over a coffee cup. The metal returned to his own throat, tapping my wrist when he bent to hear me better in noisy rooms. Settled, but never careless. He reached up and rubbed the flour from my cheek with his thumb. "Almost, what is in the folder?" I asked, because if I let the quiet stretch another second I might do something reckless like lean in. "Property deeds, a trust, your name added to both." I blinked. "Why?" His eyes held mine with the unbearable seriousness he usually reserved for death or strategy. "Because if you stay in this life, I don't want you standing in it on my permission alone." The words hit deeper than any formal declaration could have. "That sounds dangerously like respect." "It is." I let out a shaky breath. "Dante Salvator, are you proposing real estate?" A flicker of dry amusement crossed his face. "There's also a ring." He reached into his pocket and set a small velvet box on the table between the flour and the ravioli tray. For a second, I couldn't move. This was not a fairy tale moment. No violins, no kneeling spectacle, just an old kitchen made warm by windows and pasta and the weight of all we had survived standing quietly between us. I opened the box. Inside lay a ring of dark gold with one small oval diamond, flanked by 2 tiny saints, engraved inside the band where no one else would see. Lucia and Alina, I realized a second later and my throat closed. "Dante, if you say no, the trust still stands." His voice stayed even, but his hand had curled once against the table edge. Cost. Decision, vulnerability he would never perform, only endure. "If you say yes, I won't promise you safety I can't manufacture. I can promise you truth. And I can promise that no one trades your life in my sight again." Tears came fast and stupid and completely sincere. I laughed through them. "You make vows like a man negotiating a ceasefire. It's the most sacred language I speak." That undid me entirely. I closed the box and took one step closer until the metal at his throat brushed my wrist. Cool silver, warm skin beneath, same sensory thread, new meaning. "Yes," I whispered. "Not because you can keep the dark away, because you never lied about it, because you let me choose it. Because somewhere in all of this you became the place I stopped pretending." His eyes shut once like relief hurt. When they opened, the nickname came softer than it ever had. "Come here, Saint." I did. His hands settled at my waist with the confidence of something earned. He kissed me then, finally, fully, gently enough to break and remake me in the same breath. No hunger taking. No rushed possession. Just warmth, grief, gratitude, and the long answer to almost everything we'd left behind. When he drew back, his forehead rested on mine. From the hallway, Nico's voice floated in on purpose and much too loudly. For legal reasons, I am not eavesdropping, but if this is good news, I request tiramisu. Marta's answering smack was audible. I laughed into Dante's shoulder. And for one small, ordinary minute in a house built by men who knew too much about violence, the kitchen sounded like a life. 9 months later, the thing that undid Dante was flour, not bullets, not negotiations, not the mayor pretending he had never needed quiet donations in cash. Flour. It lived on the bridge of my nose and one sleeve of my sweater, because the ravioli dough had gone rebellious under my hands, and Marta had declared me overconfident before noon. The kitchen windows were open to late spring. Basil warmed on the sill. The estate, for all its gates and cameras and men at the perimeter, sounded almost domestic from here, distant voices in Italian, a fountain going in the courtyard. Nico in the pantry, asking Giulia whether olive oil could count as cardio if lifted repeatedly. No, Giulia said. What if I lift it with passion? Still no. I smiled into the dough. Some things had changed beyond recognition. Some had not. The east wing no longer locked from the outside. The chapel Madonna hung restored, the hidden compartment sealed forever beneath proper conservation resin, and a private prayer I had written and never shown anyone. Matteo is still limping in the rain. Nico still loved Marta with comic despair, though now she sometimes sets aside the best cannoli shell without commenting on it. Which, according to Nico, was practically an engagement, and Dante still went quiet when something mattered enough. I heard him before I saw him, not his step. The small, unmistakable click of the St. Michael medal against his belt buckle as he paused at the kitchen threshold. The sound traveled through me the way it always had. I looked up. He had come in from outside without removing his coat, dark hair wind-shifted, jaw shadowed by the end of a long day. Men in his world were still dangerous. Problems still arrived in cars with tinted windows. His phone still rang at hours decent people called sleeping. None of that had vanished because I wore his ring and knew where the good plates were kept. Thematic shadow, chosen with full knowledge. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and watched me work. There it was, the bookend without announcement. Chapter 1 had opened on blood and silence, in a room expecting fear. On my hands moving toward a wound before I understood the cost. Now, with flour on my sweater and Basil in the window, I felt his gaze on my hands again. He had that look. The one I had learned meant the past was standing too close behind his ribs. What happened? I asked. He took a second to answer, which meant the day had teeth. The meeting ran long. That is not an answer. One side of his mouth moved. You become inconveniently observant when you live with someone. Only with someone committed to evasive phrasing. I wiped my hands on the apron and crossed to him. Only when I reached him did I see the split across his knuckles. Small, fresh. A bright bead of blood welling from the same hand I had wrapped with white linen in the first room where my life had broken open. He saw my eyes land there. It's nothing, he said. I looked up at him. You always say that when it belongs to you. Something in his face went still. The kitchen had gone quiet behind us. Even Nico, still somewhere in the pantry debating the athletic properties of olive oil, seemed to understand instinctively when not to ruin a moment. Spring air moved through the open windows. The fountain kept ringing in the courtyard. Ordinary things, radical things. I took the clean dish towel from the counter and folded it once. Dante did not stop me. That was the bookend. The old answer in a new room. Blood, then flour. Fear, then home. I wrapped the cloth around his hand carefully, my fingers dusty with dough, his skin warm beneath them. The St. Michael medal slid forward when he bent his head, the cool edge brushing my wrist. I tied the knot and smoothed it flat with my thumb. He had gone silent again. Not the silence from Chapter 1, not a shock, not distance, the kind that came when something mattered enough to hurt. You still do that, he said at last. I kept my eyes on the knot because looking at him felt suddenly dangerous in the sweetest possible way. Do what? His hand turned into mine, large and careful and scarred. He closed his fingers lightly around my wrist, not stopping me from leaving, only holding the truth there. You see the wound before the weapon. My throat tightened. Outside, a gate opened for a car and shut again. Somewhere deeper in the house, Mateo's cane clicked twice against the stone. Life is going on, men still armed. Darkness is still employed. Nothing made harmless by love, only chosen with clearer eyes. I smiled a little, though it hurt in places old grief always kept tender. Someone has to. Dante's gaze stayed on my face with that unbearable steadiness that had once terrified me, and now felt like the place I set down whatever weight I could no longer carry alone. No, he said softly, you do. It was the closest thing to a confession he had ever given me, not that he loved me. We had built a life in that fact already, not that I had changed him. Men like Dante were not clay. They were stone and history and damage and discipline. But this was him telling me what it cost him. That after everything, after war and graves and ledgers and sisters buried too young, I could still make him remember there was a part of him that had not died where he left it. My eyes burned. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything that mattered and pretended otherwise only when mercy required it. Saint, he murmured. The nickname no longer sounded like possession. It sounded like a place, a vow, the warmest thing in the room. I stepped closer until the flower on my sweater brushed his coat and the metal settled cool between us. I'm making ravioli, I said, because if I let myself cry first, I might never stop. I can see that. I'm doing it badly. You're doing it stubbornly. That is not the same thing. It is in this house. I laughed, and this time when it came, he smiled for real. Small, private. Entirely mine. He touched the bridge of my nose with one finger, gathering the flower there, then kissed the spot he had cleaned. Not hungry, not desperate, earned. Behind us, Nico chose the exact wrong moment to wander halfway out of the pantry holding a bottle of olive oil. He took one look at us and backed up immediately. I was never here, he announced. Giulia's voice followed from somewhere behind him. A miracle. Write down the time, Nico muttered. One day she'll respect my cardio theories. Marta from the stove called back. When hell freezes, and you eat a vegetable without dramatics. The kitchen filled with human noise again. Safe noise, though not the naive kind. The kind built after surviving. Dante slipped his uninjured arm around my waist and drew me back against him while I reached for the pasta cutter. The metal clicked softly against the edge of the counter. Same sound, different life. I leaned into him without thinking. That maybe was the most radical thing of all. His mouth found my temple. Tell me what to do, he said. I glanced at the dough, the filling, the flour everywhere. Then at the estate beyond the window, at the gates and guards and sunlight lying warm across stone that had once felt like a prison. Seal the edges, I told him. His hand settled over mine. This time, neither of us was bleeding. And when I looked down at our hands dusted white together on the dark wood, I understood something I would probably keep understanding for the rest of my life. Love had not saved us from what we were. It had only made us choose it honestly. Like this, he asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. Exactly like that. And for the first time since my brother brought me to his house as punishment, the silence that followed was not a threat. It was peaceful. Would you have chosen Dante, knowing love would never make his world clean, only make it worth facing?